Welcome back to Game Development with Pygame. We are continuing to build our Shmup game, and this is part 7 where we will add a score to the game and also discuss how you draw text on the screen. Okay, so we're going to add a score to the game. Then all we need to do is down here before the game loop, we should initialize our score variable to be starting out at 0, and then we want to give ourselves some points right here every time a bullet hits a mob. So now we could say in here just something simple like hits and just add 1 to it, and you get a point for every mob you blow up. But that's a little boring because we have big ones and small ones, and it'd be nice if the smaller meteors were worth more points because they're harder to hit. So if we looked at our images, we have our big meteor, which is about 100 pixels wide, and we have our tiny meteor, which is only about 20 pixels wide. So what I want is for this tiny one to be worth more than the other. Well, if this meteor is 100 pixels wide, if we look back, what we did was we set the radius here to be equal to the width of the rectangle times 0.85 divided by 2. So the radius on the big meteor is going to be about 43 pixels, but on the small one, it's going to be about only 8 pixels. So if we want that radius of 8 to be worth more points than the radius of 43, then what we can do is make the score add 50 minus the radius of whatever we hit. So that way for the big meteors that are 43, we'll get 7 points, and for the little tiny ones, we're going to get 50 minus 8, which is 42 points. So we're going to get a lot more points for hitting the tiny ones. And we can adjust that and make it a little more fancy later, but that's going to be good enough for now. So now we have a score, and the score is being tracked, but we have to draw it on the screen where we can see it. And that's where things get a little tricky. Drawing text on the screen in Pygame is a little involved, and it takes several steps. And if you're going to draw the text more than one time, then that means you're going to have to do those steps over and over again. So it makes a lot of sense to define a function to handle just drawing text on the screen, and then you can reuse that whenever you need it. So what we're going to do is up here at the top here, we're going to define a new command called draw text. Okay, and the parameters of that are going to be a surface that we want that text drawn on, the actual text, which will be a string that we want it to for what we want it to say. We'll put a size for how big we want the font to be, and then an X and a Y for the location of that text. Okay. So the first thing we need is we need a font. Now, fonts can get tricky because not every computer necessarily has the same fonts on it. So if you try to use a font that exists on your computer, and then you take that program and try and run it on your friend's computer, and they don't have that font, then things might not work the way you expect. So it's usually a good idea to use a very generically named font. And you can do that. The easiest way to do that is I'm going to make a quick variable name here called font name. And I'm going to use the pygame.font.match font command. And what that match font command does is instead of having to know the exact name of the font, Pygame will search through the list of fonts on your computer and find the closest match to that name. So that way you don't have to worry about whether it's Arial Bold or Arial TTF or some other name. You can just put a name there. And as long as you stick to something generic like Arial or Times or one of those, you're going to be fine on just about every computer. Otherwise, you're going to need to include a font file along with your game that's specific to your computer. And that works great if you want, really custom looking text on your game, but we'll get to that a little later. For now, I just want to talk about drawing generic text. Okay, so we have our font. Okay, so we're going to create a font object. That's pygame.font using the font name and the size. Okay, so now we have a font object that can create text. And what we mean by creating text is everything Pygame does is in pixels. So it needs to figure out exactly what pixels it needs to use to draw the text in that particular font. So we're going to create a surface for it to render those pixels onto. And we just say font.render whatever the text we had, true, which I'll talk about in a second, and then a color that we want it to be rendered in. Okay, what this true here means is this can be set to true or false, and this tells Python whether you want the text to be anti-aliased or not. And what that means is, here's a picture. Of course, when you try and have curved lines made out of pixels, you're going to get these little jagged lines. And so this is called aliasing, is what that's called when you get the jagged lines. Anti-aliasing means taking the font and instead of just drawing it in all black pixels, it puts these gray and lighter gray, almost to white, fuzzy pixels around it so that, when it's zoomed in, you can see this, but when you zoom out, it looks nice and smooth. You can see the difference between this A here in the word alias and this A down here in the second example. It looks a lot smoother and nicer to read. So we've set this to true so that our font will look nice. Okay. Now we need to figure out the rectangle of that text surface so that we can place it. And we're going to set that rectangle's some point on that rectangle to the x and y. Now we have a decision here to make too. Just remember when we place some text, like say we're drawing the word Pygame here, and this box is around it. Do we want to center it on the XY that we give? Do we want the XY to be this corner? There's a lot of options for how we can locate things. I'm just for now going to make this be the mid-top, which means if this is the box, this is the rectangle, we're going to put x and y x comma y is going to be this point here at the middle top of the rectangle. So we'll put, that's just going to be xy. And then we just need to take that text surface that we've created that has the nice anti-aliased drawn text, and we want to blit that onto our whatever surface we were aiming at, which is usually going to be our screen, but whatever surface we specified, we're going to blit that onto the screen. So we blit the text surface at the location of the text rectangle. Okay. Now we have our nice draw text command, and anytime we want to draw some text, we can just tell it what we want it to draw, and it'll go do all of this stuff to get it onto the screen. So let's do that. Down at the bottom in our game loops draw section, we can add a little bit to draw the text. So you can decide what order to do these in. If we draw it after the sprites, then the text will be above the sprites, so it'll look like the meteors are flying behind the score, which will look pretty good. So we're just going to say draw text. Okay. Screen is the surface we want to draw on. The text that we want is a string of the score. The font size that we want is obviously optional. I'm going to put 18 there. I think it'll be a good size to read. And then the x and the y. So we're going to say width over 2, so it's going to be centered horizontally. And then I'm going to say 10, so it's just 10 pixels down from the top of the screen. Okay, and now let's see what that looks like. So see there, I have that 0 up there. Oh, looks like I made a little typo up here. I'm supposed to be adding to score. Did any of you catch that before? Because I sure hope you did. I didn't try running my program and pay attention to the fact that I was supposed to be adding the points to the score. Hopefully you noticed that. If you didn't, now you will. So now you can see, so I have 204 points. Let's shoot a big one. Let's see, now I have 212. But if I shoot the small one, there's a tiny one. Yeah, see there, I got a nice big score for shooting that tiny one. Okay, our bullets are kind of big. We might want to make those a little smaller to make it a little more challenging to hit that tiny target. It's pretty easy right now to hit these tiny ones. But anyway, now I can score away to my heart's content.